My brother told everyone at our father's funeral that I'd never amount to anything. He had no idea I already owned half the company he was fighting for. My father died on a Tuesday in March, and by the following Tuesday, my older brother Nathaniel had already started fighting over what he was going to inherit. I want to say that surprised me. It didn't. Nathaniel had spent our entire childhood positioning himself as the responsible one, the one who joined our father's manufacturing company right out of college, while I left home at 19 and built something of my own, quietly, 3 states away. At the funeral reception, standing near the small table with sandwiches nobody was eating, Nathaniel gathered a small crowd of relatives and, in that voice he always used when he wanted an audience, said, "Dad always worried about her. No stability, no real career, jumping from thing to thing. I'm just glad someone in this family was responsible enough to actually build on what he started." He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew exactly who she was. I let it go, the same way I'd let go of 100 comments like it over 15 years. I hugged my mother, thanked people for coming, and drove back to my hotel that night without saying a single word to Nathaniel about what he'd said, or what I actually did for a living, or the fact that for the past 6 years, I had quietly been an investor and silent partner in 3 separate manufacturing and logistics companies, one of which had, 18 months earlier, acquired a 45% stake in a struggling regional distributor that my father's company depended on for nearly all of its shipping contracts. My father knew. That's the part that still catches in my throat sometimes. 2 years before he passed, when I told him what I'd built, quietly, over dinner, just the 2 of us, he'd taken my hand and said, "I always knew you'd figure out your own way to matter. You never needed anyone in this family to understand it for it to be real." He asked me, that same night, not to tell Nathaniel. Not out of cruelty. He said Nathaniel needed to believe he was the one carrying the family forward, at least for a while longer, and that peace was worth more to him than being right. I respected that wish even after he was gone. Right up until the will was read. The will split the actual company, the manufacturing business, between Nathaniel and me equally, which Nathaniel had not expected and did not take well. He requested a private meeting with our father's lawyer the very next day, trying to argue that since he'd worked in the business and I hadn't contributed anything, the split should favor him. The lawyer, to his credit, simply read him the will again, word for word, and reminded him our father had been very clear and very deliberate about that 50-50 language. Nathaniel decided the way forward was to make the company as difficult for me as possible, hoping, I think, that I'd simply give up my half out of exhaustion or disinterest. He restructured shipping contracts without consulting me. He quietly tried to renegotiate terms with the regional distributor to cut costs, terms that would have devastated the distributor's margins. He didn't know, of course, that the distributor's board would need to approve any renegotiation that severe, and he certainly didn't know that I sat on that board, under the name of the holding company I'd invested 3 years earlier, a name that had never once come up in family conversation because, frankly, no one in my family had ever asked me a real question about my career long enough for it to. The renegotiation meeting happened on a Thursday in April. Nathaniel walked in with his team, prepared to push through terms that would save our company money at the distributor's expense. I walked in 15 minutes later, on the other side of the table, representing the holding company's interests as a board member. I watched my brother's face shift through confusion, disbelief, and something close to panic in the span of about 4 seconds. He asked, in front of 6 other people, what exactly I was doing there. I told him the truth, plainly. I was there because I held a controlling interest in the very distributor he was trying to squeeze, and because our father's company, the one Nathaniel was so determined to protect on his own, depended entirely on maintaining a healthy relationship with the company I partly owned. I didn't destroy him in that meeting. I want to be honest about that, because I could have. I could have let the renegotiation collapse entirely and let Nathaniel explain to our father's remaining employees why their jobs were suddenly at risk because of his own decisions. Instead, I proposed a middle ground contract, one that protected the distributor's margins while still giving our company reasonable savings, structured fairly, the way our father would have wanted it done in the first place. Nathaniel didn't speak to me again for almost 2 months. When he finally called, it wasn't an apology, not really. It was a request. He needed my approval, as co-owner, for a new equipment loan he wanted to take out against the company. I approved it, on the condition that from now on, major financial decisions would go through both of us, formally, in writing, the way they always should have. He agreed, quietly, in a tone I'd never heard him use with me before. 6 months later, at a family dinner neither of us was particularly eager to attend, my mother asked Nathaniel how the business was going. He said it was going well, better than expected, actually, thanks to some good advice he'd gotten on the distributor contracts. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. We both knew exactly whose advice he meant. I don't know if Nathaniel will ever say the words "I underestimated you" out loud. People like him rarely do. But he stopped introducing himself at family gatherings as the one who carried the business forward alone. He stopped mentioning, unprompted, how stable his path had been compared to mine. And when a cousin asked him recently what I did for work, he simply said, "She's an investor." A really sharp one, actually, before changing the subject. I think about my father sometimes, and the promise I kept for him longer than I probably needed to. He wanted peace for his son, even at the cost of his son truly understanding who his sister was. I gave him that peace while he was alive. But I stopped protecting Nathaniel's version of the story the moment he decided my silence meant I didn't deserve a seat at the table he thought was only his. If you've ever been the family member everyone assumed was directionless, unstable, or simply not as responsible as a sibling who talked louder about their own success, remember this: you don't need to correct every room that underestimates you. You only need to correct the ones that try to take something from you while doing it. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Silent Empire. New story every week, subscribe so you never miss one. See you in the next one.